And Maya Raghu is on the line with us. She is the Director of Workplace Equality and the Senior Counsel to the National Women's Law Center. NWLC.org is the website. You can tweet her at Maya, MAYA_RAGHU. And Maya, am I saying your name right?
Yes.
Okay, great. First of all, we wanted to talk about, in part, I think, why women don't report these kinds of things. And at a certain level, I mean, all we have to do is look at what's going on.
Right. The last 2 weeks.
Yeah, but also there's this project, and I believe this is your group, the National Women's Law Center, the Believe Survivors, the hashtag, and this walkout today at 1 p.m.
That's right. It's a national walkout and moment of solidarity with Dr. Blasey Ford, with Deborah Ramirez, and with all survivors to show them that we believe them. They have support and they have allies. Mm-hmm.
And do you want to speak to women who don't report these kinds of things? And when, in particular, when you've got powerful men like this, I mean, Kavanaugh will become arguably more powerful than a president in some regards. The ability to actually strike down laws, change the nature and character of America, and he's got therefore very powerful allies and people who want a piece of him or that sort of thing. I mean that that own him and will do things on his behalf basically to protect him.
That's right. And what we've seen over the last 2 weeks is what's being replicated across the country and what's been going on for years, which is that for survivors, they run a very real risk of coming forward. It's a risk to their personal safety, to that of their family and their friends. You see that Dr. Blasey Ford and her family are receiving death threats. There's a fear of retaliation from their community, from their jobs and losing their jobs. And, there's a lot of fear. There's a fear of not being believed, not being taken seriously, for having their motives questioned. Why are you coming in? Why are you speaking up now? Why didn't you speak up before? You're making this up. And, there's also some shame, and there's a lot of victim blaming that people very rightly fear. So there are a lot of reasons that fear drives that decision. And I want to also say, there are a lot of survivors who come from particular communities from whom going to law enforcement is a very complicated and fraught decision. So, communities of color, especially African Americans, LGBTQ individuals, immigrants to this country, all have very good reasons for maybe not wanting to report to law enforcement when they're the victims of sexual violence. The other thing is that, everyone experiences trauma differently. We know from the medical experts and professionals that it impacts everyone differently. Survivors respond to and process trauma differently. It's got short-term impacts. There are long-term physical and emotional and psychological impacts. So that also plays a role in terms of why some survivors don't come forward immediately or, in fact, at all.
Right. And then meanwhile, we've got now, I've gotten several emails from right-wing sources, or people have forwarded actually to me emails that they've gotten from listservs and things that they're parts of, suggesting that this is all an effort to take down Trump, that, that Kavanaugh now will understand how bad Clarence Thomas had it, and, we're sick and tired of these not just women, but liberals trying to take down, et cetera, et cetera. How is this? I realize you're an attorney with the National Women's Law Center, but I'm curious your thoughts on how this is playing out, the politics of this are playing out, and how they're playing out now versus, I think it was 91 was Clarence Thomas, in terms of the changes that we've seen in our culture, not just the recent Me Too, but just that. I mean, it's been what, 25, 30 years, something like that. It's been a while. And society presumably has gotten more enlightened. So what are your thoughts on that?
That was our hope, and certainly the last year in particular provided examples of how maybe our culture and our attitudes towards survivors of sexual harassment and sexual assault were changing. But, given the experience of Dr. Blasey Ford, it almost seems like it hasn't, unfortunately. We will not stand by if they re-traumatize a survivor in public on national television. We hoped they've learned some lessons from the terrible treatment of Anita Hill in 1991. The all-male Republican members of the Senate Judiciary Committee seemed not to have learned from that historic mistake, and they're trying to do the same thing, or worse, to Dr. Blasey Ford. The Senate Republican leadership knew about the new allegation, early last week, but instead of halting the confirmation process and calling for an investigation, they instead called for the vote to be pushed up in an effort to get their guy on the court. They are politicizing a survivor's pain.
Well, and apparently if I may interrupt, they called for moving up the date of the vote when they learned that there was a second accuser coming forward. The
right.
Republicans knew this before all the rest of us knew it.
Right.
And
exactly.
And they were. I think they were trying to bury that. I mean, it certainly looks that way.
Right, exactly. Instead of calling for a fair, impartial, nonpartisan investigation to uncover the facts on which their decision should be based. What we're seeing now is, the survivors who have come forward are being put on trial, and that's not right. It's Brett Kavanaugh's fitness for this position to be a Supreme Court justice that's at issue. This is a job interview for him, and instead the Senate Republicans are just trying to ram it through without any process.
Yeah, and then back, I believe it was during the Reagan administration, Douglas Ginsburg was nominated for the Supreme Court, and it came out that he had smoked pot in high school and in college, and he withdrew his nomination. That was enough. Now, pot is I don't think pot was even that big a deal back then, frankly. As compared to this, I'm so surprised that he hasn't just said. Of course, I guess okay, that's it, I'm out of here. But I guess that would be interpreted as an admission of guilt, and he doesn't want to go there. So why? But then that raises the question: why isn't Brett Kavanaugh himself calling for an FBI investigation? Why is it that the women coming forward are saying, yes, bring in the FBI. We know 5 years in prison if you lie to the FBI. Bring them in. We want to talk to them. And Kavanaugh and the Republicans are saying, no, we don't want the FBI anywhere near this thing. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if they continue to go forward with this hearing on Thursday, the Republicans and their allies must clear a very, very high bar. Everyone is watching. A lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court is at stake. And if they circumvent that process or an investigation, it devalues the promise of justice for the millions of survivors in this country, especially young women and girls. What kind of message is that sending to them, that your experience, your pain isn't important? What's important is the career of powerful men.
And that seems to be the principal focus of the Republican Party right now. Maya, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great talking with you. And Maya Raghu, she is the Director of Workplace Equality and Senior Counsel with the National Women's Law Center, NWLC.org.